The Roman Image. The talkative man said, "Once I was an archaeologist's assistant. I wandered up and down the country, probing, exploring, and digging in search of antiquities, a most interesting occupation, although cynics sometimes call us grave diggers. I enjoyed the work immensely. I had a master who was a famous archaeologist called Dr. Something or other. He was a superb, timeless being who lived 1,000 years behind the times and who wanted neither food nor roof nor riches if only he was allowed to gaze on undisturbed at an old coin or chip of a burial urn. He had torn up the earth in almost all parts of India and had brought to light very valuable information concerning the history and outlook of people of remote centuries. His monographs on each of his excavations filled several shelves in all the important libraries. And then, as our good fortune would have it, he received an inspiration that Malgudi district was eminently diggable. I am not competent to explain how he got this idea, but there it was. Word was brought to me that the great man was staying in the dark bungalow and was in need of an assistant. Within an hour of hearing it, I stood before the great man. He was sitting on the floor with the most crazy collection of articles in front of him. Pots and beads and useless coins and palm leaves, all of them rusty and decaying. He had a lens by his side through which he looked at these articles and made notes. He asked me, "What do you know of the archaeological factors of your district?" I blinked. Honestly, I didn't know there was any archaeology in our place. He looked at me through his old spectacles, and I realized that my living depended upon my answer. I mustered up all the knowledge of elementary history I had acquired in my boyhood and replied, "Well, nothing has so far been done in any methodical manner, although now and then we come across some ignorant villagers plowing up old unusual bits of pottery and metal." "Really?" he asked, pricking up his ears. "And what do they do with them?" "They simply throw them away or give them to children to play with," I replied. "Oh, too bad," he muttered. "Why couldn't you have collected these things in one place?" "I will take care to do that hereafter, sir," I said, and that settled it. He engaged me on the spot at 50 rupees a month, and my main business was to follow him about and help him. I had my wits alive, and within a month I was in a position to lead him by the hand. Not the slightest object escaped my notice. I picked up everything I saw, cleaned and polished it, and held it up for his opinion. Most times, I am sorry to confess, they were useless bits of stuff of known origin, namely, our own times. But I am glad to say that once I scored a hit. We camped one weekend at Siral, a village 60 miles from the town. It is a lovely ancient place consisting of 100 houses. Sarayu River winds its way along the northern boundary of the village. The river here is broader than it is anywhere else in the district. On the other bank of the river, we have the beginnings of a magnificent jungle of bamboo and teak. The most modern structure in the place was a small 2-roomed inspection lodge. The doctor occupied one room and I the other. We were scouting the surroundings for a mound under which was supposed to be a buried city. This discovery was going to push the earliest known civilization 3 centuries farther back and rival Mohenjo-daro in antiquity. We might be pardoned if we set about our business with some intensity. Our doctor somehow seemed to possess an inexplicable feeling of rivalry with the discoverers of Mohenjo-daro and such other places. His greatest desire was to have a monopoly of the earliest known civilization and place it where he chose. This seemed to me a slight weakness in his nature, but pardonable in a great man who has done so much else in life. This is all beside the point. Let me get on with the story. One day, I had gone to the river for a bathe. It was an exhilarating evening. I had done a good day's work assisting the doctor to clean up and study a piece of stained glass picked up in the field outside the village. The doctor kept gazing at this glass all day. He constantly shook his head and said, "This is easily the most important piece of work which has come under my notice. This bit of glass you see is not ordinary archaeological stuff, but a very important link. This piece of glass is really Florentian, which went out of vogue in AD 5. How did it come here? It is not found anywhere else in the world. If the identity of this is established properly, we may ultimately have a great deal to say about the early Roman Empire and this part of India. This will revolutionize our whole knowledge of history." He talked of nothing but that the whole day. He trembled with excitement and lost all taste for food. He kept on muttering, "We must tread warily and not overlook the slightest evidence. Keep your eyes open. We are on the eve of great discoveries." And I caught this excitement and acquired a permanently searching look. I was in this state when I plunged into the waters of Sarayu that evening. I am a good diver. As I went down, my hand struck against a hard object in the sandy bed. Feeling with my fingers, I found it to be a stone image. When I came to surface again, I came up bearing the image with me. Dripping with water, I sat on the river step without even drying myself and examined the image. "This takes us on to an entirely new set of possibilities," exclaimed the doctor in great joy. He keenly examined it by our tin lantern. It was a stone image, a foot high, which had acquired a glass-like smoothness, having been under water for several years. It had an arm, an eye, the nose, and the mouth missing. There were a few details of ornament and drapery which the doctor examined with special care. It was 3 a.m. when he went to bed. An hour later, the doctor peeped in at my doorway and announced, "This is a Roman statue. How it came to be found in these parts is a historical fact we have to wrest from evidence. It is going to give an entirely new turn to Indian history." Within the next 2 months, all the important papers and periodicals in the world published details of this discovery. Papers were read before historical associations and conferences. I came to be looked upon as a sort of savior of Indian history. For the doctor insisted upon giving me my due share of fame. University honors came my way. I was offered lucrative positions here and there. It was finally decided that the image was that of a Roman emperor called Tiberius too. It would be out of place to go into the details that led to this conclusion, but you need to have no doubt that the doctor had excellent reasons for it. Besides the study of the image itself, he went through some Roman texts which mentioned South India. For the next few months, we toured about a great deal, lecturing on this subject and demonstrating. I went with my doctor to Madras and started work on a monograph on the subject. It was about to be a monumental work covering over 1,000 pages of demi-size, full of photographs and sketches. You can understand why it should be so big when I tell you that it was going to be a combined work on early Roman history, Indian history, archaeology, and epigraphy. My name was going to appear as the joint author of the work. I realized that here was my future, fame, position, and perhaps some money too. The doctor left me in entire charge of this work and went away to Upper India to continue a piece of work which he had already been doing. I sat in a large library the whole day, examining, investigating, studying, and writing. I became a fairly important person in learned societies. I worked from 7 in the morning to 11 in the evening, almost without a break, and throughout the day I had visits from people interested in the discovery. Papers and journals contained paragraphs now and then. Archaeologist assistant working on monograph, and its progress was duly reported to the public. And then there came a time when the press could announce, "Monograph on which has been working for months now will be ready for publication in 10 days. It is expected that this is going to make the richest contribution to Indian history." My fingers were worn out with writing. My eyes were nearly gone. I looked forward to the end of the work and then, as my doctor wrote, You can have a holiday for 3 months in any hill station you like and forget the whole business. The manuscripts piled a yard high on my table. It was at this stage that I had to visit Cyril once again. I had to obtain measurements of the spot where the image was found. I left my work at that and hurried to the village. I plunged into the river and came up. I sat on the river step, still dripping with water, noting down figures, when a stranger came up and sat near me. We fell to talking, and I told him about my work in the hope of drawing out further facts. He was a rustic, and he listened to me without emotion. At the end of my narration, he remained peculiarly moody and asked me to repeat facts about the image. He compressed his lips and asked, "Where do you say it came from?" "Rome." "Where is that?" "In Europe," I said. He stood still, puzzled, and I amplified. "Where the European people live?" "I don't know about that, but if it is the image which you found in these parts, I can tell you something about it. It is without nose and arm, isn't it?" I assented, not knowing what was coming. He said, "Follow me if you want to know anything more about this image." He led me up the bank along a foot track which wound through the jungle. We reached a hamlet a mile off. He stopped in front of a little shrine and said, "That image belonged to this temple." He led me into the shrine. We had to go stooping into it because of its narrow doorway and low roof. At the inner sanctum, there was an image of Mari with a garland of yellow chrysanthemums around her neck, lit by a faint wick lamp. On one side of the sanctum doorway stood a Dwarapalaka, doorkeeper, a winged creature a foot high. My friend pointed at the image and said, "This formed a pair with the one you picked up, and it used to adorn that side of the doorway." I looked up where he pointed. I noticed a pedestal without anything on it. A doubt seized me. "I want to examine the figure," I said. He brought down the wick lamp. I examined by its flickering light the Dwarapalaka. "Is this exactly like the one which was on that side?" It was a superfluous question. This image was exactly like the image I had found, but without its injuries. "Where was this made?" "I had it done by a stone image maker, a fellow in another village. You see that hillock? Its stone is made into images all over the world, and at its foot is a village where they make images." "Are you sure when it was made?" "Yes. I gave an advance of 20 rupees for it, and how that fellow got delayed. I went over to the village and sat up night and day for 2 months and got the pair done. I watched them take shape before my eyes, and then we collected about 50 rupees and gave it to him. We wanted to improve this temple." I put back the lamp and walked out. I sat down on the temple step. "Why do you look so sad? I thought you'd be pleased to know these things," he said, watching me. I am. Only I've been rather unwell," I assured him. "Can't you tell me something more about it? How it came to be found in the river?" Yes, said my friend. "It was carried and thrown into the river. It didn't walk down there." "Oh!" I exclaimed. That is the story. For this, we went to the court and had the priest dismissed and fined. He cannot come near the temple now. We spent 1,000 rupees in lawyer fees alone. We were prepared to spend all our fortune if only to see that priest removed. It went up to Malgudi court. We got a vakil from Madras. "What was wrong with your priest?" I asked. "No doubt. He had a hereditary claim and took up the work when his father died. But the fellow was a devil for drink, if ever there was one. Morning till night he was drinking, and he performed all the puja in that condition. We did not know what to do with him. We just tolerated him, hoping that someday the goddess would teach him a lesson. We did not like to be too harsh, since he was a poor fellow and he went about his duties quietly. But when we added these two Dwarapalakas at the doorway, he got a queer notion in his head. He used to say that the two doorkeepers constantly harried him by staring at him wherever he went. He said that their look pricked him in the neck. Sometimes he would peep in from within to see if the images were looking away, and he'd scream, "Ah! Still they're watching me!" and shout at them. This went on for months. In course of time, he began to shudder whenever he had to pass these doorkeepers. It was an acute moment of suspense for him when he had to cross that pair and get into the sanctum. Gradually, he complained that if he ever took his eyes off these figures, they butted him from behind, kicked him, and pulled his hair, and so forth. He was afraid to look anywhere else and walked on cautiously with his eyes on the images. But if he had his eyes on one, the other knocked him from behind. He showed us his bruises and scratches sometimes. We declared we might treat his complaints seriously if he ever went into the shrine without a drop of drink in him. In course of time, he started to seek his own remedy. He carried a small mallet with him, and whenever he got a knock, he returned the blow. It fell on a nose today, on an arm tomorrow, and on an ear another day. We didn't notice his handiwork for months. Judging from the mallet blows, the image on the left side seems to have been the greater offender. The culmination came when he knocked it off its pedestal and carried it to the river. Next morning, he declared he saw it walk off and plunge into the river. He must have felt that this would serve as a lesson to the other image if it should be thinking of any trick. But the other image never got its chance, for we dragged the priest before a law court and had him sent away. Thus ended the villager's tale. It took time for me to recover. I asked, "Didn't you have to pick up the image from the water and show it to the judge?" "No, because the fellow would not tell us where he had flung it. I did not know till this moment where exactly it could be found." When I went back to Madras, I was a different man. The doctor had just returned for a short stay. I told him everything. He was furious. "We have made ourselves mighty fools before the whole world," he cried. I didn't know what to say. I mumbled, "I'm so sorry, sir." He pointed at the pile of manuscripts on the table and cried, "Throw all that rubbish into the fire before we are declared mad." I pushed the whole pile off the table and applied a matchstick. We stood frowning at the roaring fire for a moment, and then he asked, pointing at the image, "And what will you do with it?" "I don't know," I said. "Drown it. After all, you picked it up from the water. That piece of nonsense," he cried. I had never seen him in such a rage before. I wrapped the image in a piece of brown paper, carried it to the seashore, and flung it far into the sea. I hope it is still rolling about at the bottom of the Bay of Bengal. I only hope it won't get into some large fish and come back to the study table. Later, a brief message appeared in all the important papers. The manuscript on which Doctor and assistant were engaged has been destroyed and the work will be suspended. The doctor gave me 2 months' salary and bade me goodbye.